My wife called me that Friday morning in a panic, asking me to come home immediately. I left the family business, which my father had entrusted to me and my brother, because I felt something was wrong. Beth Tate, a stay-at-home mother who had never worked outside our marriage, only reached out to me at work for significant matters, so I knew this was serious. I was concerned that something might have happened to one of our teenage daughters at school, hoping it wasn't as grave as her call suggested. Both our daughters were very athletic, so I wondered if it could be a sports injury. My daughters were my life, both growing into beautiful young women, just like their mother. We ran the largest electrical company in the state. I handled commercial projects while my brother managed residential ones. Since taking over, we had more than tripled our volume each year for the past 6 years. My mother was immensely proud of us for continuing my father's legacy. Last year, our company achieved a milestone, making $5 million net for the first time in its over 50-year history. In the 9 years since our father's passing, we had built the business into a very successful enterprise, valued at around $20 million. As the oldest, John was made president by our mother, who retained 52% of the shares. My brother and I each held 24%, a setup to ensure our mother's financial security. After my father's death, my mother insisted I manage her personal investments. I shifted her portfolio from conservative to aggressive, yielding excellent results. When I arrived home, I was shocked to find movers packing up our belongings. Beth was standing by the road next to a 2020 model car I had purchased for her. She was leaving me for good, and her daughters had already been relocated without my knowledge or permission. She had kept them out of school to avoid them witnessing our breakup. It was clear she had orchestrated this to prevent any discussion with our daughters. "I'm sorry, James, but I've fallen out of love with you and am in love with someone else," she said, handing me the divorce papers. "You don't need to know who he is because it doesn't matter now. I've already filed for divorce." She wanted our last contact as a married couple to be brief. With that, she got into her car and drove away, marking the end of our 17-year marriage. Her departure was so abrupt that I didn't even have a chance to understand our daughter's feelings about the situation. I initially thought she might have met someone online, but the timing didn't fit with her being home and our daughter's awareness. As the movers took another piece of our daughter's furniture out of the house, I realized they must know where the furniture was going. I asked the driver, who kindly shared the delivery address with me. To my shock, the address was familiar. I tipped the driver generously and asked him to lock up after finishing. I drove back to our family business, making a stop to verify the address. What I discovered shattered my life. Not only had Beth left me, but she had done so for someone I knew well. Beth had been a constant presence in my life since her early teens, always tagging along with her brother and me. Wherever we went until her early teens, the three of us were inseparable. Her brother remained a good friend, but was now a dedicated Marine, applying the morals, principles, and standards he was raised with to his career. I was proud of him and had deep respect for his commitment. As we progressed through our teens, we developed different interests and grew apart due to the usual changes in life. With my father's business booming, much of my spare time was spent helping out. Sometimes I would be receiving stock for upcoming jobs. When I asked my father why he hadn't used his own name for the family business, he said, "Tate and Sons, or variations have been used too much and often don't last. I want this business to endure long after I'm gone." Parrish is your mother's maiden name and gives it a sense of continuity. My older brother John, who was 3 years older than me, would take me along when delivering supplies to job sites. Because of his age, he earned a wage, whereas I didn't. I used that time to learn as much as I could. After finishing the 10th grade, I joined an apprenticeship program to earn my electrical license and continued my education online, graduating from the 12th grade before completing my apprenticeship. I also started working towards a university degree in business management. The skills and knowledge I gained helped my father expand and grow his business. Meanwhile, John worked his way up the ladder, learning every aspect of the business through hands-on experience. He also picked up some less desirable habits along the way. What set us apart was that I began bidding for and winning small commercial contracts, often bringing projects in under budget. This approach, which my father and brother knew little about, significantly contributed to our growth. Our innovative methods earned us a reputation that far exceeded our expectations. My father used to say that I was the brains of the company and John was the brawn, and it took both of us to make the business successful. At 20 years old, living on my own, my brother called me one night, too drunk to drive home from a wild private party. He didn't want to risk getting caught by the police, so I went to rescue him. After helping him into the back seat of the car, I heard a voice behind me. "James, can I get a ride home with you? My date is passed out somewhere, and if I don't get home, my dad will be furious." Beth, at 17, had become a very beautiful young woman with mesmerizing blue eyes and an irresistible smile. She had an hourglass figure that attracted attention and long blonde hair. Her presence was captivating, and I was struck by her beauty. Knowing her parents were protective and would be upset if they knew where she was, I agreed to give her a ride home. Her father, clearly concerned about his daughter being out late, was waiting when we arrived. I stopped at the edge of the road to hide my brother, then helped Beth out and walked her to her front door. Her father was ready to reprimand me for bringing her home late, but was relieved to find it was me. "Damn it, Beth, you should have told me your date was James. I wouldn't have worried." A week later, Beth visited my father's shop after work, asking me to take her to her senior prom, which was still 2 months away. I agreed to think about it and offered to drive her home. That evening, I took her out for dinner after confirming with her parents that it was okay since it was a school night. It took her most of the night to convince me of her interest, and it was another 2 weeks before I started taking her seriously. On prom night, we agreed to become exclusive. That was how it all began, and now the end of our marriage had come. About 20 minutes later, I arrived at our head office. I walked to John Tate's office, feeling both angry and determined, only to find the door close. I asked his receptionist if my brother was in, and she said he was inside, speaking to someone on the phone, and wanted privacy. I asked Mary, the receptionist, to come with me into my brother's office. "I need you to be a witness to what I have to say," I told Mary. She could see the intensity in my expression, and nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Without warning, I kicked open the door to John's office, breaking it open. John looked up in surprise as we entered, abruptly ending his phone call and turning off his cell phone. In a fit of rage, I said, "You need to get this business appraised and find a way to buy my shares. You have as long as my divorce takes. Do you understand?" Mary's mouth fell open in shock. She had never seen me this angry. "What is this all about?" John asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "The movers gave me the address where they're delivering Beth's belongings. I saw my daughters leaving their new residence just as Beth pulled in," I explained. John stood silent, struggling to figure out how to handle the situation. "It wasn't intentional," John said coldly, showing no remorse. "She's just staying with me until she finds a place to live." "That's a lie," I replied. "Beth told me she was moving in with the man she's in love with. She even said she didn't need to tell me his name because it was none of my business anymore." John's face turned white, and I could see he was at a loss for words. I knew him to be someone who avoided facing uncomfortable truths. Mary looked equally stunned, realizing John's behavior was far worse than she had expected. "How long have you two been involved?" I demanded. "On those afternoons when I covered for you, was it so you could be with her? I'll probably need to get tested for STDs considering some of the people you've been with." John's face went pale, and he quietly said, "I don't think this is the right time or place for us to discuss this." "There's never a right time for something like this, John," I said firmly. "You should go to the bank and start discussing how to buy out my shares or put the business up for sale. We're done as business partners and as brothers. There's got to be another option." John protested, "We can't afford to lose you. We need to talk this through when you've calmed down." In my anger, I picked up the phone on John's desk and dialed our mother, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear. "Mom, I have some bad news," I said, my voice almost trembling with rage. "Today is my last day. I'm resigning from the family company effective immediately. I've told John he needs to find a way to buy out my shares as soon as possible." "What?" Mom replied, shocked. "You love that business. You're the rock that has made it what it is. What has happened to make you decide this? I think you should ask John when you find him. He might be at home because his secret lover is moving in today. I hear they're getting married as soon as her divorce is finalized. He's likely with her, showing his support," I said, beginning to calm down. "I suggest you drive over to his place and introduce yourself to the woman he's been bragging about. You'll be meeting her as her future mother-in-law." I hung up the phone. John's rage was palpable, but he couldn't speak. "Mary, could you follow me to my office and ensure I don't take anything that belongs to the company? I want to avoid any claims that I was fired for theft," I said. John was growing increasingly angry as I made my expectations clear to the staff. Before leaving his office, I said, "Should I walk out backwards so you won't have a chance to betray me again, John? With what you and Beth have done, it would have been easier if you had just shot me." We walked back to my office where my receptionist was working. I said, "Joe, could you please come in and witness what is about to happen? I think Mary will appreciate having a witness for this." "James, what's going on?" Joan asked. "I've resigned because John has taken my wife and children from me," I said. "I was served with divorce papers at home. The movers gave me the address where they were delivering Beth's belongings, and it turned out to be my brother's place." Both of our long-term executive assistants were in shock. They had been our steadfast support for years, and I valued them greatly. Mary said, "Let's list everything James takes, along with what keys he returns. We'll type it all up and make 5 copies. Joanne and I will each keep a copy for safekeeping, so if any documents disappear, we can verify what happened today." Their trust in the process showed me just how much they valued their roles. It made me wonder what other secrets my brother might be hiding. It took about an hour to get everything sorted. I called security to escort me out and verify what I was taking with me. I watched as both ladies placed the extra copies in their purses. My brother had left in a hurry without saying goodbye, likely trying to avoid the situation at his home. I later learned he arrived too late as everyone saw our top 2 executive assistants escorting me out with the security personnel. With tears in their eyes, I kissed both ladies on the cheek and thanked them for their years of support. I took a single box from the security officer's hand as I left. As soon as I was outside, everyone wanted to know what was happening. The ladies explained as best they could. After opening the trunk, I threw the box in and closed it. On my way through town, I stopped at a real estate office and listed the house. I gave the representative my wife's cell phone number and instructed her that I would leave it up to my soon-to-be ex to decide the listing price. When I got home, I found that besides the personal belongings, only the bedroom furniture of our daughters had been taken. I shut off my cell phone and read through the divorce papers. The grounds were emotional and mental cruelty, and she was asking for primary custody of our daughters, Beau and Bree, with supervised visitation for me once a month for 1 hour. Beth thought I was too strict because I didn't allow our daughters, aged 13 and 15, to date without chaperones. She felt I was outdated and that my views on morals and family were too restrictive. Beth believed that my approach to raising our daughters was stifling their personal development and mirrored the way her father had treated her. She was using our differing views on parenting as a reason for the divorce. I went to the liquor cabinet and poured myself a drink, flipping through channels but finding nothing suitable to distract me. It seemed I passed out from drinking, waking up with a hangover on the living room sofa still in my business suit. After undressing, showering, and shaving, I made breakfast and went outside to do my usual Saturday chores. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I turned my cell phone back on and saw text messages from my mother, my brother, my wife, and my 2 daughters, all trying to reach me. I suspected that my daughters were in on the situation and had agreed to go with their mother. The only message I trusted was from my mother. Once I had settled down and thought things over, the real estate agent called me. "Mr. Tate, your wife finally showed up this morning. She was quite upset to find that you're letting everything in the house go." I showed her comparable properties in the area, and she agreed to add $20,000 to the asking price because of the value of the furniture. "Thank you for informing me," I said. "I'd like it sold as soon as possible because the house holds too many memories." "Just so you know," she broke down when she saw what was happening. "She was shocked by your decision. I asked her what she expected. 'Miss Waterston,' she said, 'she left you for your brother, and now you're selling the house. She expected you to take it as a given. She even mentioned demanding to be bought out of the family company.' I responded, 'What choice did she leave me? Was I supposed to be content knowing that I'm just a victim of my brother's actions for the rest of my life?" Miss Waterston noted, "It seems like Beth was not prepared for the extent of your reaction." Her face showed how taken aback she was. I told her, "You might be able to fool many people, but I know what's really going on. Miss Waterston mentioned she has an excellent divorce lawyer for you. She'll send you the contact details." I thanked her for her help and ended the call. As I refreshed my coffee, I saw my older sister's car pull into the driveway. I finished making my coffee and went to the front door to let her in. "Mom must have called you after visiting John's place," I said. "It's a long drive from their place. It must be important." Connie looked at me and said, "I can't believe what they've done." Mom was devastated when she found Beth and your daughters setting up house at John's place. What are they thinking? I'm in shock too, I said, my eyes tearing up. I had no clue how long this had been going on. From what Mom told me, it's been about 2 years. How could I have been so blind? I added, "Before we talk more, you should read the divorce paperwork to understand why she's requesting the divorce. I just made a fresh pot of coffee. I'll get you some, and then we can discuss it." Connie read through the paperwork, which detailed minor arguments exaggerated to an extreme. "Beth wants you out of your daughters' lives," Connie noted. "Most of what she claims is exaggerated. As we both know, Mom doesn't want you leaving the family business. So, Mom wants me to accept my brother's betrayal and remain in the company as if nothing happened. Is that it?" I'm thankful to the real estate agent for highlighting this. Connie was visibly shocked. "I can't believe what they've done. The stigma they're putting on you is appalling. The breakup of your marriage and their attempt to take away your kids. That's why I'm leaving the company," I said. "No matter what deal is made, I'll always feel that my brother is mocking me for turning my family against me. He's taking what was mine because he lacked the courage to build his own family life." "Your husband deals in business," Connie suggested. "Perhaps he can help find someone to buy the company. Our brother has left you no choice but to cut him out of your life." Connie called her husband and explained the situation. After hanging up, she said, "He'll have a team come in to appraise the company's market value on Monday morning. I'll also need to convince Mom that this is the best solution for everyone." I went to my home office, pulled out the last 5 years of financial records, and set them in front of her. "These are the corporation's financial statements and tax returns for the last 5 years. Your husband will need them." "What about Bew and Bree?" Connie asked. "That will depend on what Judge Donald McDonald decides," I replied. "I would have chosen Dale Britton, but he's currently tied up with a significant case and is not taking on new cases. Her lawyer is portraying a very unfavorable picture." Connie and I spoke for a few more minutes before she left to have a serious conversation with our mother. That night, I couldn't sleep well. I was used to having my wife beside me. I decided that after meeting with the lawyer, I would leave town for a few days. I needed to separate myself from the situation to view it more rationally. Connie called me after she and Mom had a long chat with the pastor following Sunday service. The pastor said that the one who has been hurt the most may never fully recover. What they did was despicable, but unfortunately quite common in today's society, where love and decency have lost their moral value. Love has become just a four-letter word unless demonstrated through consistent actions. Mom was evidently surprised by the pastor's comments, especially when he said that James is not the first to have his life ruined by a family claiming to love him, and won't be the last. Mom agrees to put the whole business up for sale, Connie explained, not solely because of John's actions, but because she understands that John would mismanage it without me. She wants to know who should take my place. I asked Connie if Mom understands that I have no choice but to consider my brother as good as dead to me. Yes, and I had to explain to Mom what a cuck means in societal terms, and what that label implies. Connie said. Mom, who had always avoided strong language, expressed her anger by saying she would confront Beth if she ever saw her again. Tell Mom she needs to appoint Carl Robertson as president, I instructed. He was my second in command and knows everything I do. If she doesn't, John could override him, and he would. The commercial side is crucial for us to get the best price for the company. This must be done properly. Connie asked if we should inform John in advance. I said no. If Mom feels she can't handle it, she will need to appoint you as CEO for a 1-year term, or until the company is sold. You need to understand why I must stay out of this. My involvement could be used against me in the divorce court. Connie agreed to check with her husband to confirm my reasoning. She also mentioned that she had faxed him all the corporate information. About 2 hours later, Connie texted me that she was the new CEO and would follow my suggestions the next morning. While having brunch, I prepared pan fries with eggs and bacon when Beth called. This time I answered, "Can we talk?" Beth asked. "We just did. If you or your lover contact me again, I will file harassment charges," I said. "Any remaining issues will be resolved in court." Beth tried to discuss our children, Bree and Beau, and suggested working things out now that I was calmer. "We will sort this out on my terms, not yours," I replied coldly. "I will be going to court for paternity tests to confirm whether they are my children or my brother's. I believe everyone has the right to know the truth, and I will never return to anything involving him." Beth gasped in shock. "They are yours, and you know it. I believe I had a loving wife until I came home on Friday," I said. Clearly, I was wrong. Given these new revelations, I must consider the possibility that I may not be their father. After all, John could have been involved with you for years and enjoying it while I was the one supporting the family. Beth started crying, but I felt no sympathy. I ended the call. On a hunch, I contacted my former executive assistant, Joan. "Sorry to bother you, but I could really use your husband's advice on what I'm about to face," I said. "Let me talk to David," she said. After a brief wait, she returned and said David was on his way. About half an hour later, David arrived. I let him read the divorce petition and walked him through everything that had happened since Friday. "Let's be clear," David said. "You do not have any concrete evidence of when the affair started, other than what you've heard from a third party." "That's correct," I confirmed. "In the court's eyes, this justifies requesting verification of the paternity before proceeding with anything else," David advised. "The way you discovered the affair suggests a deliberate long-term deception against you. Judge Donald McDonald will require biological proof before making any ruling. The judge is strict about relying on actual facts rather than personal beliefs or presentations of the facts." "Is the judge really that strict?" I asked. "Yes, it took me 6 months to finalize my divorce, and none of us were entirely happy with how it turned out," David explained. "But I can honestly say that when it was all over, his decision was the right one because he prioritized the needs of the children." I offered David a drink, and as we chatted about his relationship with Joe, we heard a truck pulling into the driveway. I stood up and looked out the living room window to see my brother John arriving. "I can't believe he has the nerve to show up here after everything he's done to me," I said. "I wish I had one of my dad's 22s, David muttered. "Sit down. I'll handle this. If you won't leave, I'll show him my badge. I don't think he wants to deal with the Cape Girardeau police." David opened the front door and pulled the window down on the screen door so I could hear their conversation. John slammed his truck door in anger and shouted, "Where the hell is my stupid brother?" David responded, "We could sit down and work this out, but the a-hole won't listen. Now he's going to have to because I've got a few things to sort out with him right now. If he won't listen, I'll make him." John retorted, "Screw you, a-hole. Get the hell out of my way." I left Beth in tears because he's questioning the paternity of his daughters. He needs to be set straight, and I'm the one who's going to do it. David asked, "When did the affair start?" "About 5 years ago, if it's any of your business," John replied. "That's interesting," David said, showing his badge. "Beth told your mother yesterday that it was 2 years ago. I have to question what the truth is because it's clear from your statements that both of you are trying to make the other look like a liar. It's apparent that James was expected to accept being deceived by both of you and continue as if nothing had happened. Was it your plan to gradually break him down and turn him into your personal submissive?" John was stunned and at a loss for words, revealing that neither he nor Beth had seriously addressed the situation with each other. "I wonder what the judge will say when I present the recorded video of this conversation. I suggest you get back in your truck and prepare Beth for the paternity tests that are coming. Your explanations about your relationship lack credibility and will likely be seen as attempts to defuse the situation." As John walked back to his truck, I realized that things were turning out much differently than they had planned. Once John drove away, David returned to the house. "What's your lawyer's name?" he asked. I provided him with her contact details, and he said he would reach out to her on Monday and send her a copy of the recording. "Why did you bring your police cam?" I asked. "It's standard practice in domestic situations," David explained. "When Joan told me you wanted to talk, I knew anything could happen, so I came prepared." I told David that I planned to leave town after seeing the lawyer. "I think it's best to stay out of the area for a while due to what's coming up. Is it anything the police might need to be called about?" David asked. "Our older sister has been appointed CEO of the family company this morning," I disclosed. "Tomorrow, she will appoint Carl Robertson as president. He was my second in command, and Joan, who has worked closely with him, will likely become his executive assistant. The current president, John, will be demoted to vice president. This is happening because our mother doesn't want John ruining what my father and I built before she finds a buyer." David agreed with my reasoning. "If I were you, I'd be packed and ready to leave right after the lawyer appointment. John will be furious when he sees it's all you're doing. From what I know about your brother, he's hot-headed and reacts without thinking. People like that are capable of anything." After David left, I cleaned up the kitchen, then went to Ace Hardware and bought a new lock set for all the doors. It took about 2 hours to get that done. I was about to start changing the code on the house security system when my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller's information and prepared myself. It was Beth's father. "What's going on, James?" he asked. "My granddaughters have been calling me from a number I don't recognize because Beth has confiscated their cell phones and your phone is never on." "Did you ask Beth why?" "I've tried, but all she says is it's a personal matter and that she'll explain everything later," he said. "Katie and I have had enough. We want some answers now." "Beth moved out on Friday," I explained. "She called me home from work just as the movers were finishing and served me divorce papers. She said she had fallen in love with another man and his name didn't matter." "Are you serious, James?" my father-in-law asked quietly. "I'm afraid so," I said. "The movers gave me her new address because your daughter couldn't be honest with me. The man she moved in with is my older brother. From what the family has been told, their relationship has been going on from 2 to 5 years, depending on who you ask. My gut tells me it's been going on much longer. Beth doesn't want me to have any contact with Beau and Bree. In her divorce petition, she's requesting that I only be allowed 1 hour a month of supervised visits with them." "Why would she want that?" he asked. "You've been one of the best fathers I've ever seen. I think she doesn't believe I'm the biological father of her children," I said. So my lawyer will be asking for DNA tests to confirm the truth. Just so you know, I am no longer associated with the family business. It sounds like she already has an idea who their real father might be. Beth's father said, if she's right, we can assume she has been lying to us all her life. What should I tell my granddaughters when they call again, since we haven't been getting any truth from their mother for a long time? Tell them the truth, I said. As soon as we said our goodbyes, I got back to work resetting all of the codes. I decided to go out for a bite to eat, so I went to Golden Coral. It was just after 11 a.m. when I left the lawyer's office. She agreed it was a mess. David had sent her the video file, which she thought was crucial because it would cause the judge to question the plaintiff's credibility. My lawyer believed that their own mistakes had put me in a strong position moving forward. I had just left the bank after canceling all debit and credit cards in my wife's name and removing her from all bank accounts. My next stop was the real estate office to give her the access code and new key to the house. With that done, I hit the road south. About an hour into the drive, Joan called. Just making sure you're on the road, Joan said. Connie just walked in and is being directed to Carl Robertson's office. I left about an hour ago after dropping off the keys to the house with the listing broker, I said. Heading south with no particular place to go. I'll call you afterward to let you know when it all goes down. Joan said, text me a warning so I have time to pull over. Will do, I said before hanging up. I drove on until I found the next rest stop. Finally, away from everything, I let it all out. Thankfully, being midday, no one else pulled in. I'm not sure how long I had been there before I got out to stretch my legs and walk around. I had just returned to my car when a police cruiser pulled in. The officer got out and approached. I was sitting on the other side of the highway watching for speeders when you pulled in, the officer said. After 2 hours, I was a bit concerned, so I thought I'd come over and check if everything was all right. To be honest, I'd been through 4 long days of emotional turmoil, I said. I decided it was best not to drive further. Starting a divorce can do that, he said with a smile. Yep, how did you know? I asked. The road south with no clear destination seems to be a common thought during tough times, he said with a smile. He opened his trunk and pulled out 2 cold bottles of Coke, offering me one. We were still chatting when the text message came in. Do you need privacy? He asked as we stood there. No, but you might enjoy hearing the call that's coming. I'm about to find out what happened with my wife's lover's employment situation, I said. I answered the text and put the call on speaker. How did it go? I asked Joan. Carl Robertson accepted the president position temporarily after he learned it was you who suggested him, Joan said. Connie and Carl went into John's office and informed him of his removal. John didn't take it well and refused the vice president's position. Carl then said with a smile, I guess then you've decided to quit. Let me call security to escort you out. John kept swearing and cursing about you, feeling this was all you're doing. So my brother has lost his job and joined the unemployed, just like me, I said. Oh, for John, that's got to hurt his pride a lot. Off the record, James, from what I've heard, I think that was Connie and your mother's plan all along, Joan said. Gotta go. Expect a phone call from Connie shortly. Along, Joan said. Gotta go. Expect a phone call from Connie shortly. The police officer saw a big smile come across my face as I started to explain. My wife of 17 years left me for my brother. I resigned as vice president from the family corporation that same day and demanded they buy out my shares. They never saw this coming. I had just finished explaining the whole mess when Connie called, so I put the call on speaker. Hey, when can you get back here? Connie asked. Why? From what I've heard, you've got everything under control, I said. You don't need me. Carl is the right man for the job, Connie said. Smart as he is, you know nothing, she said. My husband spent the whole weekend lining up financing so you could buy your brother's shares. Our mother wants him out, and he'll be using a third-party business loan to achieve it. So get back here so Carl can assume the vice president position he accepted, but only if you come back as president. All right, sis, I'll meet you all at Mom's place around 6 tonight. I said, is that soon enough? Tell Joanne to order new office furniture for my new office, and for the office that goes with the new position she'll hold as my executive assistant. Have the rooms cleaned out and freshly painted. Let her decide the colors, as she knows me well. I'll give her a 10% raise when I see her in the morning. With that said, we said our goodbyes. I had a big smile on my face. What's the name of your company? The officer asked. Parish Electrical, I said. We're in about a third of the state, and always expanding. Your motto is no job is too big or too small, he said. That was your dad's favorite saying, so we adopted it years ago, I said, and I personally still feel that way. We talked for a few more minutes, and he handed me his business card. Before we parted, he told me where the next turnoff was so I could reverse my direction. He followed me out. I was thankful for the kindness shown by the officer that day, and when I found the turnoff, I took it as he drove on. When I got back to town, I looked at his card. It provided the division's location and his cell phone number. I put the card in my wallet for safekeeping. It was close to 5:30 when I pulled into my parents' place. I got out of the car and walked towards the front door. Before I reached it, my mother was already there to meet me. Neither of us spoke. We just held each other, sharing a tender moment. I learned that Connie was at the airport picking up her husband, who wanted to discuss plans for buying John's shares. My father had been smart when he set it up because we couldn't sell our shares without the approval of the other two shareholders. Mom and I had a good chat before my cell phone went off. It was my wife's father. Hi, Dad. I said, what's up? Have you heard the rumors going around about your brother at the workyards around this part of the state? He asked. Let me step into a different room before I answer, I said as I left the room my mother and I had been in. Okay, now I can talk. Yes, I've heard them, but honestly, I've never seen anything that would lead me to believe them. Why? He's got some concerning material on a computer in his office at home, Dad said. Beau and Bree discovered it last night and called us. They're rightfully afraid to be in the same room with him. We picked them up at school. I don't know what to do. Call Joanne and tell her what the children told you. I said, say you're providing sanctuary for the kids until it can be verified that they're not in danger. Don't reveal your name and don't use your own phone. Go buy a disposable one for $20. Keep them hidden for a few days. Why call Joanne? He asked. She works for me, and her husband is a cop, I said. Her husband will be the first one she calls. Then it will be me. Thanks, Dad. I owe you big time for stepping up for my daughters. Text me her number to their grandmother's phone, and I'll take care of it. I'll let you talk to your daughters, he said. I was still talking to them half an hour later when my mother came in and said the police were there and wanted to talk to me. I told my girls I had to go, hung up, and texted the number to my mother-in-law's cell phone before going into the other room. I cleaned out all my text messages. David, it's good to see you, I said. What can I do for you? I came here to see if your mother knew where you were. Your daughters are missing, and your phone was busy every time I called, he said. Beth has filed an official complaint accusing you of kidnapping your own daughters, David said. I looked over at my mother, whose face showed great concern. Well, David, I'm happy to clear it up. What time did my daughters disappear? I asked. Right after closing bell at 2:30 this afternoon, David revealed. I reached into my wallet and handed David the state trooper's card, saying, give him a call right now. I think it would be best if you learn for yourself how I know him. I watched as David made the call. My mother came over beside me, and I wrapped my arm around her lovingly. She knew I wasn't concerned. She heard David's side of the conversation and saw the huge smile come over his face as he ended the call. I should have known, David said. You have the perfect alibi. At the time of their disappearance, you were sharing a cold Coke and talking about your problems an hour away with one of our fellow officers. Just then, David received 5 text message notifications in a row. He glanced at his phone and said, "Excuse me for a moment. I have to call someone. I'll be right back." David stepped outside and returned a few minutes later, asking to speak with me privately. We went into the room I had just come out of, and I closed the door to ensure privacy. "What do you know about the rumors about your older brother?" he asked. "Most of the men he worked with say my brother prefers them younger than they should be," I said. "Growing up, from the time I started dating, I kept my girlfriends as far from him as possible. Even though I never saw anything, I had my suspicions, so I played it safe." "It seems your daughters discovered something they shouldn't have on your brother's home computer, which scared them," David said. "They told someone at school, and they've been granted sanctuary until we can investigate it fully." I sat down and placed my head in my hands. When I first reconnected with Beth when she was 17, she was running with a wild crowd. I had gone to pick up my brother that night because he was drunk. She asked me for a ride home. I wonder now if John had been her date that night. That would explain a lot of things, wouldn't it? David said. I wish there was some way to prove it. David walked over to where I sat and whispered, "Tell whoever is protecting your daughters that we won't be charging them. But I will need a few days to resolve this. Your mistake was giving them my wife's number. My wife learned they had called you an hour ago and asked you what to do. It's Beth's parents. I had no clue. I did tell them to buy a disposable phone to call your wife," I said. David laughed and said, "Be thankful for having in-laws that care so much. I'll be seeing a judge in the morning for a search warrant on your brother's computer. Let him know I might need your daughters to tell the judge what they saw." We walked back into the living room, and I escorted the 2 officers to the front door. Just as I opened the door, Beth stepped in. "Are you arresting James for kidnapping?" she asked. "Not at this time," David said. "Your soon-to-be ex has an unbreakable alibi. He was with a police officer talking about you when your kids disappeared." Beth's face went white. She had been so sure the kids would be with me. "I guess maybe the girls have run away because they don't want to live with you," I said. "David, do you think I should go home in case they show up?" Beth asked. "I think that's the smartest idea I've heard all day," David said with a big grin. "After all, they're old enough to decide with whom they want to live. The only thing keeping you away from your children is their mother. Just give me a call if they show up." I watched the police officers drive away before turning to Beth. "The night I gave you a ride home, when I was picking up my brother because he was drunk, was he your date?" The look on Beth's face revealed it all. "I guess I now know how long you've been seeing him behind my back, don't I?" My mother, in rage, yelled, "James, throw her out of my house right now, and let her know that if I ever see her again, I will use one of my dead husband's rifles and put a bullet between her eyes myself." I looked at Beth and said, "I'd run if I were you. She might change her mind and come after you right now." I'd never seen Beth so scared. It took her about 10 seconds to reach her car. I couldn't help but break out in laughter as she drove off in a hurry. "Well played, Mom," I said. "She actually believes it." "She better, because I meant it," my mother replied. I opened my cell phone and called Beth's father. "Dad, can you bring Mom and the kids to my mother's for supper?" "Are you serious?" he asked. "We're going to celebrate the return of my daughters to the family," I said. "There will be no future problems with Beth or the police." "We're on our way," he said. "Mom, the girls will need to stay here until I can purchase furniture. Is that okay? Why don't you all move here until at least the divorce is done?" Mom said. "That way, you can be free of the reminders of the damage Beth has done to you. I can drop them off and pick them up from school, but tomorrow I'm taking them shopping for new clothes." "Sounds like a deal to me," I said as I leaned in and gave her a hug. "Make sure you get them new cell phones." Beth took theirs away when she moved them into John's place, so they couldn't contact me. Mom went into the kitchen to inform the cooking staff that there would be 4 more joining us for dinner at 8. I went outside to retrieve my suitcases from the car and brought in the suits I had hanging. Mom directed me to the bedroom that would be mine, so I took my belongings up to that room. Beth was deeply troubled, worried sick about her daughters, and convinced that James was responsible for their disappearance. Her true relationship with John had now come to light. John had been her first partner before James, and they had reconnected. John had respected their space after their initial reunion, but it wasn't until after the birth of her second daughter that he decided he needed to address what he had always considered to be his. Does this work for your narrative? She had resisted his attempts for a relationship for a long time. On a Wednesday afternoon, while the girls were at school, he showed up at their house just after lunch. With James out of town on a business trip, she let him in. He took her in his arms and kissed her. Soon, she found herself caught up in the moment. It was a powerful experience for her. He turned her around, and their connection deepened. This afternoon reinforced the idea that once you've experienced something profound, it can be hard to find true happiness until you've found it again. John said loudly to the empty wall, "Let it be known that I am claiming this goddess as my woman, my wife." His response showed her willing agreement. She had allowed him to express his feelings for her that afternoon. The connection between them was intense and profound. Each moment was a powerful reaffirmation of their bond. After she had gotten her daughters in bed and made sure they were asleep, she walked into the master bedroom to find John waiting. They spent the night together, their connection deepening as they rested in each other's embrace. The next day, after seeing the girls off to school, they continued to explore their relationship with renewed energy. John had come back and spent time with her, reinforcing their bond. By the end of that week, they had made a commitment to each other and decided to publicly acknowledge their relationship by moving in together. They had hoped James would eventually accept their relationship, but he reacted very differently, causing significant upheaval. John had come home to inform her that he had been pushed out of his company by the new CEO, his own sister. He was planning to consult a lawyer about his options. It was through their real estate broker that they realized the extent of the damage caused to James, both personally and professionally. They had disrupted his life in a way they hadn't anticipated and were now facing the consequences of their actions. Beth wondered what people knew and how they perceived her and John's relationship. She realized she needed to bridge the divide between herself and James, so she picked up the phone to call him and check if he had heard anything about their daughters. When James answered, she asked, "James, have you heard anything about the kids?" He replied, "No, I haven't, but I don't think you need to worry." "Why do you feel that way?" she asked. "Because if they're as lucky as you were, they'll be taken care of by someone who will guide them well," he said. His words highlighted his concerns about the influence John might have had on her. Beth ended the call and sat in her car, overwhelmed with emotion. James had pointed out a painful truth about how their relationship might be viewed by others. James had always feared that his daughters would be negatively affected by John's influence. John, known for his assertive nature, had become a prominent figure in Beth's life, and this was difficult for James to accept. Beth felt ashamed and conflicted. She realized that the two men she had loved represented very different ideals. One wanted her to grow into a better person, while the other, although superficially similar, had different expectations for their relationship. She felt she had compromised her values and principles for what she now saw as a superficial ideal. At a family celebration, Beth's parents and I had a heartfelt reunion after a challenging few days. We kept our focus on supporting each other, with the girls excited to see their relatives. During the meal, we discussed our temporary plans until the divorce was finalized. Beth's father and I took a walk to talk privately. He asked, "How long has Beth and John's relationship been going on?" I replied, "From what I've learned, it's been on and off since the first time I brought her home from a wild party. John had been her date that night." Beth's father's eyes welled up as he asked, "Then why did Beth start pursuing you?" I explained, "I think John began to desire what I had and started pursuing Beth. He has always been more aggressive. My father-in-law told me John felt he had to live up to my standards, and that frustration drove him." Beth's dad remarked, It's a shame John had to pull Beth into his troubles. The police will be seizing his computer this week. If it is what we suspect, Beth might end up with supervised visitation of her daughters. It seems she'll face the consequences of her actions, Beth's dad said, reflecting on the situation. I was late to the office on Tuesday morning because I was enjoying time with my daughters and my mother, who was thrilled with the chance to spend time with her granddaughters. When I arrived at the office, employees were lined up to congratulate me. Carl Robertson, along with Mary and Joanne, shook my hand. I assured Carl that once the president's office renovations were complete, we'd address his requests for the vice president's office. The daily newspaper announced my appointment as president and Carl's promotion to vice president following John Tate's departure from the company. As a result, both Carl and I were inundated with new business opportunities. It appeared that John's departure had a positive impact on the firm's reputation. Later, I went to pick up the rest of my clothes from my former home. I had called my mom and knew they were still out shopping. As I was loading the trunk, my brother unexpectedly attacked me from behind. During our previous fight, he had beaten me badly. I grabbed a tire iron and swung it defensively toward his leg, causing him to release me. A neighbor must have seen the commotion and called the police, who arrived to separate us. By then, neither of us was in great shape, but at least I was still standing. The officers noted John's inebriation and aggression and arrested him. I collapsed and later woke up in the hospital where I learned I had cracked ribs and severe bruising. The doctors thought that with some rest, my ribs would realign on their own. I had a lot of internal bleeding and my body was covered in bruises, as was my face. My mother said I looked like a character from a movie. John was going to be charged with aggravated assault. My daughters were upset by both my appearance and the incident. I explained to them that their mother and uncle had been acting out of uncontrolled emotions, which clouded their judgment and worsened the situation. I reassured them that while I would recover, the long-term damage to their mother and uncle was a concern. The girls and my mother stayed with me until I fell asleep. The next morning, Connie, Mom, and Tom visited me in the hospital room. To secure the loan Tom needed, we had to agree to expand into the northern part of the state. A competitor in that region had gone bankrupt, and Tom suggested we take over their contracts and make a low offer on their equipment and buildings. I proposed buying controlling interests in their shares, but Tom explained that their debt was too high, and their union contracts had costly pensions and medical commitments. Mom surprised us all by revealing that James had been the de facto president of the company for years. Even though James kept Jacob informed and sought his approval, it was James who had been running things. Mom proposed giving James the 27% of the shares needed for him to have full control, as we couldn't be sure John would sell the rest. She also intended to give the remaining shares to Connie, stating that she had enough from James' wise investments to live comfortably. I added that I would only agree to this if Tom agreed to become our chief financial officer. I acknowledged it might affect his pay, but stressed it was a necessary sacrifice. Connie was moved by this gesture as our father had never fully accepted Tom. I offered to cover Tom's moving expenses and the cost of a new house, which surprised Tom. He was flabbergasted but eventually agreed, saying he'd be honored to join us. Mom was thrilled that Connie's husband would be coming aboard. After their departure, I called Carl to inform him of our plans. Carl believed that the company assets and contracts we were pursuing had political connections, and that there might be under-the-table dealings involved. I insisted that if the court approved our offer, all name changes and related matters needed to be handled promptly. I was released on Friday, with my mother picking me up to take me home so I could finish packing. Connie was flying in the next morning to look for a house. My body was starting to heal, and my divorce lawyer had obtained a restraining order against Beth and John. The in-laws had visited 3 times, and it had been a quiet 3 days. Mom noted that this quiet period gave the girls time to adjust. I asked how they were handling it, and Mom said they were managing better than expected but would need some private time with me. They shall have the whole weekend with me if that's what it takes, I said. Before I come back to the house, I'm going to stop by the motor vehicle office to pick up the materials for Bree to start studying for her learner's permit. Tom had given his notice and completed the company valuation, Mom said. Connie would be bringing the report and his firm's bill. They offered him a huge raise to stay, but he turned it down, saying his sign-on bonus was a new house. Tom has the expertise we need to manage this growth smoothly, I said. Besides, bringing him into the family business was long overdue. If you felt that way, why wasn't it done earlier? Mom asked. I couldn't do it before. The president wouldn't approve it, I replied. We arrived at my house, and I thanked Mom before heading inside. After opening the front door, I grabbed the mail. Amidst the mostly junk mail, there was a letter from Beth. After reading it, I tossed it into the trash. It was too little, too late, and I couldn't believe any of it. How could anyone truly apologize for something they had done deliberately? I called a cleaning service to remove all the food, clean the place, and shut off the water and equipment. I gave them the access code to disable the alarm, and said I'd drop off a key in about 2 hours. I spent an hour packing my clothes and personal items. I decided to shave parts of my face, leaving a new mustache and goatee. David called to inform me that they had raided John's place and seized his computer. John's lawyer was negotiating to reduce the charges in exchange for a guilty plea. When I got to Mom's, the girls had already returned from school and helped me move the rest of my belongings and put them away. Afterwards, the three of us lay on the bed and had a long chat. One topic that came up was the difference between physical desire and emotional connection. I explained that sex for its own sake often focuses on personal gratification, whereas making love involves prioritizing the other person's needs and strengthening the bond with them. What brought Uncle John and Mom together? But you asked, was it love or just attraction? I explained that John desired what I had and let it build up until he acted on it. Though Mom might have been initially overwhelmed, she was drawn to the raw nature of it. Each encounter reminded them of the initial attraction, which eventually led them into a long-term relationship that required deceit. I was relieved when Bree understood it simply as them buying into what the other was offering instead of having the morals to walk away. Beth then got up and returned with a red dress. She handed it to her sister and apologized, saying it was a mistake similar to what John and Mom did, but to a different degree. The dress is yours. I got up, grabbed a booklet from the dresser, and handed it to Bree, reminding her to start studying for her learner's permit. Bree was thrilled and thanked me. Mom had asked the kids what they wanted for supper, and they chose mac and cheese. It was a treat to have the old-fashioned kind baked in the oven, along with pork chops and baked beans. After dinner, knowing I was still recovering, I went to bed early. Around midnight, Beth crawled in beside me, and I pulled her close. I couldn't help but think that Beth might have misinterpreted such moments. Connie came home with an exciting gift, the completed proposal for the bankruptcy court. It needed only my signature before being sent. If approved, it would double our size with 123 new locations. Carl and I reviewed it on Monday morning, discussing the pros and cons. After signing, Joe scanned it for our records, and it was sent to the bankruptcy judge in the state capitol by same-day courier. Our records, and it was sent to the bankruptcy judge in the state capitol by same-day courier. I said, Joe, when I informed Pearl that you're now on a salary of $70,000 a year, effective the current pay period. I told them your position is now considered junior management. It was a real pleasure to see Joan's eyes tear up in pure joy. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Joan came into my office and closed the door. James, we need to talk privately for a few, she said. David wanted to let you know what's going on, so he's using me as the messenger. I stopped what I was doing, got up, and walked around to the front of the desk. After moving one of the chairs, I sat down right across from her. You have my undivided attention, I said. Joan explained that David found troubling images on her brother's computer. All the girls in the images are local and of a certain age. David is trying to find out more about their stories. He believes it might be a list of individuals he had taken advantage of over the years, as Beth's picture was among them. David wants to see if John had a similar pattern of behavior with them all. I'm not surprised, I said. A few of the workers when I was growing up mentioned that John had pictures of some of his acquaintances. Beth, at 17, would mean that John would have been 23, which could legally be considered a serious issue. It does point out a pattern of behavior that David feels can be used strategically in your divorce. Joan disclosed that this would mean you would need to directly address his motives by suggesting that the only reason he wanted Beth to move in was to gain easy access to your daughters. With what we are learning about John since his removal from the company, I said, I will have no problem doing that. The challenge is how to approach it. David will need to prepare an official internal report. Joan explained that it will be up to the district attorney to decide what to do with the information. David will bring a copy of it on a disc, which I will get to you. Sounds good to me, and I owe David one. When I called David to inform him about what you had done, he was overwhelmed by your generosity. We both know that was a significant raise. Mary has been rewarded as well, though not as much as you. As Carl's assistant, she is now in junior management too. Connie's husband is coming aboard as our first chief financial officer. I want Mary and you to find the most qualified assistant from our current staff, whom you believe would fit in well with you both. Once you have selected her, the three of us will meet with her to explain her new responsibilities. If she agrees to join the management team, we will use the empty offices where Jay's former furniture is stored for them. You're really changing things for the better, she said. We might be doubling our size and going statewide very shortly. There will be days when the upper management will be tied up or out of the office. As our executive assistants, you three will, once you are fully set up and trained, be making decisions on our behalf. So we need to ensure that Mary and I can trust the person we choose, she said, like you trust us. Any problems regarding Mary or the new hire will be part of your new responsibilities. You will handle these issues. If you can't resolve them, remember you can always ask me for advice, I said. Joan left the office with the proudest look I had ever seen. When I left for the day, Mary and Joan were in a deep discussion. As Carl and I walked out together, Carl told me the new structure going forward was brilliant. Mary and I are starting to put plans together in case our offer is accepted, Carl said. Human Resources will compile a list of who should be considered for relocation and promotion for the new openings being created. Good thing I added a 30-day notice before acceptance to give us a chance to prepare, I added. Connie's husband Tom is coming aboard as our CFO. Without his arranging the financing, there's no way we could have considered doing this. John will be contacted about buying out his shares later this week. Anything happening on the divorce end? Carl asked. We have a court hearing this week about getting an order for the blood tests, I said. We were the last ones called before the judge. That Friday, I was surprised to learn that Judge Donald McDonald was not a huge man as his reputation suggested. I had assumed he was tall and broad, but in reality, he was about 5 feet 1 inch and around 180 pounds, with a very short neck and broad shoulders. He appeared to be in his late 50s. My lawyer laid out the basic relationship of the three of us, explaining how Beth and I had reconnected. She went through how I had discovered who she had fallen in love with and confronted my brother. She then produced an affidavit from my mother, disclosing that Beth had told her it had been going on for 2 years. She played a recording from David. Judge McDonald took a real interest in it. Finally, I was called up to explain what I had learned the day Beth accused me of kidnapping my own children. I could see the judge's face becoming very concerned when I explained Beth's response during our confrontation. His expression changed noticeably, making him appear much older. Beth's lawyer attempted to counter our presentation but was unsuccessful. Finally, the judge spoke. It's apparent that there's enough circumstantial evidence to suggest that Beth and John Tate had a relationship that lasted longer than the marriage between Beth and James Tate. This indicates that there's a significant likelihood that either one could be the father. To determine the true parentage of the children, given that human memory can change over time, a DNA comparison between both potential fathers and the children is necessary. What weighs most in this ruling is the video of John Tate's statements to the police and his responses. The judge continued, "Once all issues are resolved, the divorce will be granted to James Tate on the grounds of adultery." Beth was visibly devastated, and John looked at me with pure rage. The judge's implication was clear, that they had been manipulating me for years. I had a sense of satisfaction on my face as we prepared to leave. We noticed Beth's parents and her older brother standing by, ready to leave the courtroom. I saw the pain and sorrow in their eyes. They had been there for the entire hearing. I guess her parents had hoped we were wrong. Beth approached them, but they turned their backs and walked out. The message was understood. Due to their beliefs, Beth would be shunned from their community. I walked over to Beth with my lawyer beside me. "Beth, you must be very proud. Not many can say they have caused such disruption to two families in less than a month," I said. "I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that both Bree and Beau are doing well." My lawyer and I continued on our way out as Beth began to cry. Outside, Beth's family was waiting. "Mom, Dad, do you want the girls for the weekend?" I asked. It would give them a chance to spend time with their favorite uncle. Mom teared up, hugged me, and said, "We'd love to." Ted, Beth's brother, extended his hand and said, "It's good to see you, old friend. If my daughters don't tire you out tomorrow." I shook his hand and replied, "How about we go out for a late supper and a few beverages afterward?" "I'm coming home for good, James," he said. "I'm getting too old to keep up with things. I'll be home with the family for a couple of weeks to house hunt and find a job." Just then, my cell phone rang. It was Joan. "What's up?" I answered. "We just got word that the 30-day countdown is on," Joan said with excitement. "Thanks, and let Carl know I found the head for our resource department," I said, "if I can convince him to come with us." "How did it go in divorce court?" "I'll explain when I get back to the office," I replied. Bye, Ted. Bye, Ted. $60,000 a year to start, with a review after the first 6 months as the head of the new resource department. I said, "Do you want it?" Ted asked, "What does it entail?" "Management of purchasing, distribution, and control of inventory for 3 hubs, distributing to our retail stores and commercial sites. Most residential jobs are handled through our retail outlets and contracted bids. Supplies will be delivered on site from one of the hubs," I explained. "Dan, you're serious," he said. "Of course, I'll take it." Beth's dad said, "Take him to see your house if he's interested. I'll cover his down payment." So we did. Since Ted had been overseas, most of what he had there with his family would be sold off before moving back. They would be starting over with basically nothing. After viewing the house and discussing what was included, they decided to make a full-price offer. I accepted their offer with Beth's signature needed to finalize it. Ted couldn't believe how easily they could start over. I stopped at a wine shop and picked up 2 bottles of wine and a block of cheese before heading back to the office. The upper management team had a small celebration before calling it a night. My girls called to ask if it was okay to go with their grandparents for the weekend. I acted surprised but said they should go ahead and have fun. When I got back to my mother's, I told her about what I had done after court. She said, "Ted is getting a good deal. The items you're selling in that house are worth more than what they're paying. Believe me, they know you are setting them up better than they could have imagined. Despite what Beth did, he will repay you by being meticulous with every penny. Once again, you're taking the high road." "Thank you, Mom," I said. "John sold the shares back to me this morning for $5 million through my personal lawyer. So I guess I'm staying on as part of the board." "What motivated him to do that?" "He told my lawyer he had never been happy in the industry. He stayed because it was owned by the family. As soon as the divorce is over, they will be moving to Florida because he is going into property development, as he has a lot of land down there that he is going to develop." I was smiling because John would never know that our business was worth over $40 million based on the current market value according to Tom's report. Using that report, we had secured $15 million, which we had spent $10 on buying the assets and contracts in the north at $0 and 10 cents on the dollar. Tom, in reviewing their assets, felt we could recoup close to $7 million after streamlining the operation by getting rid of their head office building, the 4 unneeded storage centers, and the excess vehicles on hand. It would cost a couple of million for repainting the commercial fleet and rebranding. The incentives that kept the independent contractors working for us were based on their production and quality of service. On Christmas Eve, all independent contractors received a Christmas bonus equaling 10% of the revenue they generated, tax-free. We had learned years ago that this approach improved our service to the customer, reduced complaints about workers, and increased customer satisfaction. Mom dragged me out to one of the social events on Saturday afternoon, a community fundraiser for a family raising money to cover the copay of a huge medical bill from their daughter's treatment. There, I was introduced to Dr. Tamar Braden, their doctor. I called our accountant and asked for his approval to donate the $50,000 needed to cover the debt. Since the girl's current treatments were over and she was cured, it took him an hour to write out the check, take it to hospital billings, and have it directly applied to their bill. Tom and I were both going through divorces, so we had something to relate to. We found that both of us had been cheated on. She had not had any children yet, but didn't seem surprised when I mentioned mine were teenagers. I figured she was around 32. When he brought me the receipt showing the bill paid in full, I took it and went to the center of the room. After getting everyone's attention, I said to the Johnston family that I would like to present them with this receipt that shows their bill is paid in full. Parish Electrical heard of their plight and has covered it on their behalf. The organization hopes it never comes back again. Tamara came over to me and whispered that she was so impressed she wanted to take me home for dinner. I laughed and said she would have to drive me home afterward because I came here with my mother and she was my ride. Tamara laughed and said she couldn't be serious. I pointed out my mother, who was bursting with pride. Tamara recognized her as one of their greatest contributors. I mentioned that our company was named after her. Tamara smiled and asked, "What was wrong with the woman who was divorcing me?" I said, "Sad because they're both going down because of it. Hopefully, we made it." "Sorry we were so late," Ted's wife said as she walked towards us. "I've got great news. If you want me to start early, I can. I'm not going back with Ted. The kids and I are staying here." "James, what are you doing here?" Jackie asked. "What are you doing here?" Jackie asked. "I was just talking to Tamara," I said. "My mother's just over there watching me like a hawk." "How do you know?" Jackie asked. "He's divorcing my sister-in-law," Jackie said, "and he's going to be Ted's new boss. He gave us a great deal on his old house." "Why?" Tamara asked. "No matter what Ted's sister did," I said, "Ted will always be family. If you need any furniture," Tamara said, "I have some you can have." The only thing that didn't come with the house was furniture for the kids' bedrooms. Ted's parents bought that this morning for us after the sale was confirmed, Jackie said. When Beth signed the agreement, Ted and I let the ladies talk and walked off. "Beth and I talked for a few," he said. "She's hurting big time. She's suffering from depression. I told her that she did it to herself, but everyone else is hurting too, even your daughters, because nobody can understand why you did it, not even you, Ted. She doesn't know it's going to get worse for her before it starts to get better. A little advice, take it easy with Tamara. She's a beautiful woman who is hurting as much as you," Ted said. "She is, and has always been a keeper." Tamara came and took my hand. "Let's go. I promised you dinner, and we're going to have to go shopping to pick up a few things." Mom watched us head out. Tamara handed me the keys and asked me to drive her over to Food City, a small independent grocery store known for having the best selection of meat in the area. She offered to let me wait, but I said no, so we went in together. "What's on the menu?" I asked. "Steak cooked on a grill, a tossed salad, and if you have room, dessert," Tamara said. "If that's okay," I replied. "Sounds good. We'd best pick up a couple of bottles of red wine to go with it. It was after midnight before I got back home. Tamara and I had a wonderful evening together. We agreed to get together the following Saturday. For some reason, I had the best night's sleep since Beth walked out of our marriage. Mom dragged me to church on Sunday. Connie had finally found and put in an offer on the house she wanted. I told her to submit a copy of the purchase agreement to accounting if it was agreed to so they could issue the check. The girls met their mother at the mall for lunch. They told me afterward that it did not go well. First, they had revealed that I had met someone and hoped the lady would help me start healing. My mother had called them and informed them about my first aid. They then told her what they had found on John's computer. It was the first time Beth had heard about it. Beth was devastated because she knew she had lost the chance for sole custody of our daughters. The girls believed their mother was going through depression. Meanwhile, the district attorney had just finished laying multiple charges of statutory assault against my brother. He apparently told the parents of John's previous victims that John had just moved a woman into his house who had 2 minor daughters that suited his taste. Most of them agreed to lay charges to protect those innocent girls. They arrested him the next day at his home in front of Beth. The moment they took him into custody, Beth realized that she would never be allowed custody of her children. What her divorce lawyer had written up in the original divorce petition was coming true, not for James, but for her, because she had allowed herself to be taken down by someone who was the complete opposite of James. It had been just over 2 months since Tamara and I had met. John was out on bail. Beth and my divorce lawyers had worked out all monetary details. She would get $4 million, and that was it. She would not get any of my shares. The DNA test had confirmed that Beau and Bree were my biological daughters, and even Beth seemed relieved. We had agreed that I would get sole custody, but Beth would be allowed liberal visitation and access as long as it was not in John's presence. Beth had fought us on it during mediation, but I pointed out that the only reason John wanted her to move in was so that he could have liberal access to my daughters. Hearing that broke Beth because she had to face the fact that what I threatened to claim might be true. The amount of money I was giving her, if invested properly, would allow Beth some quality of life if John did indeed have to do time. I provided her with the names of 2 investment advisors she should work with. When the divorce was finalized, Connie and Tom had moved back with their brood of 5, much to my mother's delight. She was getting to know Connie's children intimately, and for her that was truly a blessing. Mom said her life had been filled with more love than what she had lost. I could see the truth in that comment. My mother, my sister, and I decided that Connie would remain CEO, much to Tom's delight. John's reputation had been totally destroyed. Even those he had called lifelong friends had turned against him. His legal bills were mounting. My daughters believed that as soon as their mothers and my divorce was final, their mother would dump him. The cost of having a real relationship with him had ended up being too great for her, and she was concerned about her mother's depressed state. The takeover was moving ahead quite well. The contracts that had fallen behind because of the bankruptcy had been caught up to date and were now ahead of schedule. Most would end up coming in way under the agreed price. We had decided to rebate them all 10% after the final payment had been received. We had cut the projected cost of labor and related costs by 50% since taking them over. I had flown out to see some of the changes being made in some of the new buildings and land we had become owners of. The excess had been put up for sale at their appraised value. Human Resources, working with the former employees, had arranged so that more than half of them had become contractors working out of our new retail locations. We had given them loans to buy the trucks and equipment they needed from us at wholesale prices. Part of the package set up with them included the accounting program from QuickBooks. Ted, with his skillful negotiations and due to the increase in volume, had cut the cost per item by 20%. He had started reorganizing our whole approach, which would significantly reduce our handling costs when fully completed. He was proving that I had made the right choice. Jackie and he were thrilled with their new home, making decoration changes to make it their own. The upper management team was excited because, by the time it was completed, The allowances we had for costs and losses had been reduced by 2/3. We had learned that those at the Capitol had wanted the bankruptcy handled as quickly and quietly as possible, which supported our thoughts that there had been major paybacks for some of those contracts. We had been the first and only offer, and we figured those in power wanted to ensure certain things remained hidden. Tom had hired his old firm to provide a new appraisal value due to our significant growth. Mom and I were preparing for a big barbecue at her place this Saturday. I was a bundle of nerves because most would be meeting Tamara for the first time. The whole management team and their families would be there, along with all of Beth's and my family. I slipped away to pick up Tamara because I wanted her to meet my daughters before the rest of the crowd arrived. Even though it was a casual affair, Tamara had decided to wear a dress that complemented her figure. She looked stunning with her red hair let down, wearing white with hand-stitched embroidery of monarch butterflies going down the side. Tamara was 5 feet 8 inches and weighed less than 120 pounds, but she was full of energy. We shared a few affectionate kisses before heading out. We entered the backyard of my mother's house together, holding hands. Beau and Bree came right over. Tamara must have sensed my nervousness because she said, "Relax." After introductions, Beau said to her, "If you're my dad's girlfriend, he sure picked a good one." I could see the change in Tamara right away. I leaned in and whispered, "You were as nervous as I was." Tamara acknowledged that she was. The party turned out to be a great success. Between my two mothers, my sister and my daughters, they soon had Tamara fitting in as if she had been part of the group all along. Tamara ended up learning more about me than I was ready for her to know. When Ted and I were getting a cold beverage, he said, "It looks like the two of you are starting to fall in love. Mom and Dad are going to babysit for us, so how about we go to a restaurant and go dancing?" "Sounds good to me," I said. David and I had a brief moment, and he told me that he thought John was going down for at least 7 years because of the number of parents standing up against him. Joan thought that tomorrow was the best thing that had come into my life for a long time, but was worried that I might mess it up. David said, "Why do women always think it's the man's fault?" Mom had opened up the pool, so Tamara and I were sitting in lounge chairs, watching those who decided to swim. I didn't like how much skin my daughter's bathing suits were showing. "It must have been showing," Tamara said. "You really are just old-fashioned in your values. Was your father that way?" I thought about it for a moment before saying, "Yeah, I guess he really was. He wanted us to be the best we could be and always stressed that how we walked, talked, and conducted ourselves said more about us than our own words could. Sadly, that's what drove Beth to do what she did. If my first husband was like you, we would have still been married," Tamara said. We looked at each other without saying a word before sharing a long, affectionate kiss. I think we both realized that our relationship had become serious. Bree, sticking her head out of the water, said teasingly, "Cool it, Dad. She's not our new mother yet." Having broken the mood, I took off my socks and shoes, made sure my keys and wallet were hidden in them, then ran into the pool to get her. Tamara watched as I played with my daughters for about an hour before getting out to change. When I returned, the 3 of them were having a good chat. Both girls then took multiple pictures with their phones, which they mistakenly sent to their mother, letting her know it was serious. The food the staff had prepared was exceptional. Tamara found it interesting that I went into the kitchen to thank them for how well they had done. It was noticed by all that we were never apart. We met Ted and Jackie at the Irish restaurant and bar. Tamara was the client of the owner's wife. We danced until closing, and I really enjoyed myself. I walked Tamara to her front door and was invited in. Tamara and I stopped at the house so I could change, and then went out shopping before Mom and the girls got back from church. We were all expected at Mom's for Sunday night family dinner. Everyone was wondering where I was. In frustration, my daughter texted me asking where I was and when I would arrive. About 2 minutes later, Tamara and I walked in the door. "You said, 'It's about time. Dinner's almost ready. You've got some explaining to do, Dad, because you didn't come home last night.' I couldn't help but break out in a big grin that got my sister and my mother's attention. I asked the staff to bring in 2 bottles of champagne and glasses for everybody. Tamara had her hands behind her back, and my mother caught on, a big smile spreading across her face. When we had all been served, I said, "Tamara and I got engaged this afternoon." That's when it became a lively scene at Mom's place. Tamara proudly showed everyone her diamond ring. Bree had recorded my announcement and sent a copy to her mom. That night, my mother took an overdose of sleeping pills and went to bed. She couldn't cope with me moving on with my life. She never woke up. We later learned that John and Beth were blaming each other for the problems they were experiencing. Both realized that what they had was not love but lust, and they had confused themselves because of that. Everyone was deeply affected by her passing. John and I stood by Beth's grave, sharing a few final words. He said, "I'm sorry for everything." I told him I didn't believe him because he couldn't specify what he was sorry about and walked away. That night, John took out his favorite possession, the first gun our father had bought him. After drinking a large amount of alcohol, he placed the barrel below his chin and pulled the trigger. On the table beside him, he had written 2 words, "I'm sorry." It was a week before the Labor Day weekend when I was sitting in my office reviewing a few things. Carl, Tom, Mary, Joanne, and Lucy came in carrying a huge cake, glasses, and champagne. I looked up and asked, "What's the celebration for?" "We paid off the loan in full," Tom said. "For the huge expansion, we are again debt-free." "Thank God," I said. "I never want another 6 months like the last 6 ever again." "It wasn't all bad," Tom said. "I'm looking forward to becoming your best man in 8 days. Everybody laughed because they all knew that tomorrow was 2 months along. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.